Women also would wear these headdresses, and they would usually wear them as a symbol of pride, and they would also be donned during special occasions such as Coachella. No, I'm kidding. Like weddings and different things like that. My name is Richard Dix, and this is How Did That Happen? A podcast where I look at everyday things or events and try to figure out how they came to be. Every week, I will research one topic, and by the end of the episode, I hope to truly have the answer to the question, how did that happen? All right, welcome back to another episode of How Did That Happen? It's episode 52 of HDTH. We recently celebrated our 50th episode and got over 1,700 downloads recently. Always trying to grow over here. I hope that you guys will head over to hdthappen.com for all the episode extras. You'll find things there like episode transcripts as well as pictures and or videos from every episode that I put out. There's also a works cited up there because I just like to keep it real. I can show you guys exactly where I found the information that I find. I'm not trying to make any of this up. It's all there if you would like. There's also a blog with articles that are written by yours truly. Kind of just a stream of consciousness really sort of thing for me where I write about whatever is on my mind and help kind of get it off my mind. Let's see. So before we get started here, what am I watching? I don't know if you guys have seen it, but I just watched that Casey Anthony doc on Peacock. It was interesting, to say the least. I will say that I didn't finish it. I watched the first 2 episodes, and that was about as far as I could go. I was like, there's no way there's going to be any sort of revelation at the end of this where I'm like, oh, she's definitely not super guilty. You know what I mean? So I was just, cool, I seen it, I saw it. Always try to be open-minded, and I just was really surprised. I wanted to see what they had to say. I wanted to see if she looked, if you know, crazy. And I don't mean this in any sort of insensitive way whatsoever, because I have my own mental health issues. But you look at that woman and be like, she's not stable. But move on from that to what am I listening to? Another little piece I'm adding to the housekeeping as we go on, just to tell you what kind of podcast that I'm actually listening to on a day-to-day basis right now. Can't get enough of the Tim Dillon Show. I really enjoy it. It's definitely not a plug for him. He does not need it, but it's definitely one of my favorite pods out right now. Love his take on things. He definitely makes you laugh. He can be a little graphic and it can get dark sometimes. So if it's not, if that's not your bag, you definitely don't want to head over there. But if it is, then you may be in for a treat. Let's see. Most recent episode of Bite Size Bios is out now. We did Condoleezza Rice. We dive into her illustrious political and academic career, find out all the things that she did in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, her role in 9/11, as well as maybe even the fall of the Berlin Wall. So one more thing before we get out of here. If you could like and subscribe wherever you are actually consuming this. If you want to give me 5 stars, if you feel so inclined, that's great. I always say if you want to give me 2 stars with some constructive criticism, that's fine as well too. Just let me know how you feel. But without further ado, I will give you guys the episode. All right. Wreaths. We're going to talk about wreaths today. Is it wreaths? Wreaths? Wreaths. We're going to talk about wreaths. So the word comes from the Old English word writhen, W-R-I-T-H-E-N, and it means to writhe or to twist. It can also mean to band, so it seems like a pretty good word choice. Depending on who you ask, wreaths either came from the Persians first and then the Greeks and Romans, or the Greeks and Romans made it all by themselves. My money's on the Persians. I feel like from some of the articles that I've read, I described that people, like with most things, in trade and stuff, you find you meet the Persians, you're like, oh, what's that on your head? Because it must be mentioned the original wreaths were worn on as headdresses, and they were called. They're actually called diadems, which I had never heard of and had to look that up. And they were a sign of power and or authority, and they were made of fabric adorned with jewels, and were usually worn by royalty and royalty alone. So you were either really powerful or really royal for you to have this. So when the Greeks or the Romans came into contact with the Persians, the first time, or not the first time, they were like, wow, look at that diadem on your head. I must have one for myself. And so they kind of bring that technology over to them. It's also said that the Egyptians also had a wreath type headdress of their own. But theirs was made of flowers and it was called a chaplet. So, different strokes for different folks. So the art of hanging Christmas wreaths, it originated with the Romans. So like they didn't maybe make the wreath as far as the first people to ever use a wreath of any kind, but they did create the idea of hanging it on doors as a sign of victory and their status in society. So either you were doing really well, you walk by somebody's house and you see a wreath on their door, or they are just really, really high up in society, more important than you, kind of thing. And so before the wreath became associated with Christmas, as we've previously stated, it was a prominent emblem of victory of some sort and power in ancient Greece and Rome. It was worn on the head as well as the door at some points throughout their history. Women also would wear these headdresses, and they would usually wear them as a symbol of pride, and they would also be donned during special occasions such as Coachella. No, I'm kidding. Like weddings and different things like that. Additionally, the victors of sporting events in ancient Greece, they were also given laurel wreaths, and laurel is just another type of kind of evergreen. This tradition is actually still used today during the Olympic Games, in which the medals are engraved with sprigs of laurel. So, things always, as we find, there's always these little veins of history that just won't, they won't go away. They're still around. They're still prevalent in society, even though we think we've come so far and we're so far removed from our Greek and Roman brethren of the past. We're not. We're really not. And so even before Christianity, plants and trees that remained green all year had a special meaning for people in the wintertime, because it was really important, or they thought it was really cool that basically these trees maintained their color and didn't die during the winter. So they were seen as like something that, kind of a prosperity sort of thing. And just as people today decorate their homes during the festive season with pine, spruce, and other fir trees, ancient peoples also hung evergreen boughs over their doors and windows. I think I'm pronouncing boughs right. Boughs. I'm not sure. Maybe let me go find out. Google break. Taking a break to Google. Google break. Taking a break to Google. Okay, so yes, that is how you spell or how you say that. I didn't want to go because the whole time thinking it was actually maybe baw or something like that. I don't know why it would be baw, but looked it up on the old Google machine, and bow is the right way to say it. In many countries, it was actually believed that evergreens would keep away witches and ghosts and evil spirits and illnesses. In Ovid's Metamorphosis, after the nymph Daphne rejected the god Apollo and then escaped from him by turning into a laurel tree, Apollo says, quote, "Since you cannot be my wife, you shall surely be my tree. O laurel, I shall forever have you in my hair, on my lyre and quiver," end quote. Let's see. So this passage inspired art such as the marble statue of Apollo crowning himself, which reinforced the imagery of Roman and Grecian gods, and they're wearing a green crown of leaves. So this kind of inspired a lot of these statues that would then perpetuate the idea that important people wear wreath crowns, basically, is what they're saying. Early Romans marked the solstice with a feast called Saturnalia in honor of Saturn, the god of agriculture. And I believe we talked about this, actually, maybe even last episode. I can't remember completely. There's so many different Roman and Greek festivals and things they've done that contribute to history. But I think this is where they said that the candles came from, where they would make those cakes shaped like, no, was that the moon? I'm not sure. I have to go back. Maybe you guys can go back and find out for me. The Romans knew that the solstice meant this, so the Saturnalia solstice they're dealing with, they knew that it meant soon that farms and orchards would be green and fruitful, and so to mark the occasion, they decorated their homes and temples with these evergreen boughs. As we stated, it is boughs and not boughs. When I look at it, it just looks like boughs. And that is going to bring us to wreaths in the 1600s and beyond. So the custom of bringing evergreens home during the winter began around the 16th century in northern and eastern Europe, with Germany commonly being credited with the starting of the actual Christmas tree tradition. It is a widely held belief that Martin Luther, the 16th century Protestant reformer, first added lit candles to a tree, and which would, I guess, also lead into the whole idea of like the Advent wreath, although there are different ideas as to where that actually came from. The word Advent is derived from the Latin word adventus, which means coming, which translates to the Greek word parousia, which is basically the second coming of Jesus. By the 6th century, however, Roman Christians had tied Advent to the coming of Christ. But the coming they had in mind, like I said, was actually the second coming, and not like it is now with the coming of Christmas, basically. So the season of Advent in the Christian calendar anticipates the coming of Christ from three different perspectives: the physical nativity in Bethlehem, the reception of Christ in the heart of the believer, and the eschatological, second coming. it was not until the Middle Ages that the Advent season was explicitly linked to Christ's first coming at Christmas. So like it's really what you see is that throughout the time, the idea of the Advent and the Advent wreath has meant different things. But during this period, the pruning of the tree was actually a big part of the preparation process, and that's actually where we get the kind of modern idea of what a Christmas wreath is. And so basically, like the limbs were cut off in an attempt to make the tree, more uniform and also to fit into the room. But they also wanted to cut it into the shape of a triangle, which would represent the Trinity, right? And so when you're doing that, these shavings that are falling to the ground, and these people are very what's the word? They use everything that they have. They don't throw anything away. So they would take these extra pieces of greenery, which are still important because they're still an evergreen type of tree leaf, and they would make the wreaths with these. These would be the first kind of Christmas wreaths, if you will. Because if you look back, what we mentioned so far really is like they're wreaths that existed in history for other reasons besides Christmas, or really even Christianity. You know what I mean? They were worn on your head. Or they were put on your door, but not to signify Christmas. They were put on your door to signify your status symbol, or your status in life, or that you were victorious or celebrating something great, but it wasn't specifically Christmas. This is right here is where we really start to see the idea of Christmas wreaths being associated with actual Christmas festivities. And so, like I said earlier, the evergreen trees were a species that was looked upon with awe and admiration, since they, unlike other living things, survived the harshness of winter. And the trees they appeared in abundance in northern and eastern Europe, which makes it easier for them to be brought into people's houses, and makes it something that everybody in that area does. Imagine if they weren't abundant in northern and eastern Europe, what we'd be doing for Christmas, who knows? But their proximity is of great importance, I think, when you really think about why we have this stuff. In addition to the evergreen and the idea of them being persistent through the tough winter, meaning they'll survive, which is something you kind of want to tie yourself to. The circular shape and also has to do with the idea of eternal life. And so the circle shape of the wreath is made to, or in their ideas, it represents the Christ's eternal love, his strength, and the creation of a new life. Kind of a cycle, if you will. It also represents faith, as Christians in Europe have often placed a candle on the wreath during Advent to symbolize the light that Jesus brought into the world. So that's what I was kind of saying about the whole idea of like the wreath being intertwined with the Advent calendar itself. And it is actually a German Lutheran pastor named Johann Heinrich Wittkern, I'm getting better with these names, he's the guy who's credited with turning the wreath into a symbol of the Advent. And so like the Advent wreath, we usually have, it's a Catholic tradition, and we usually have 4 candles. 3 will be purple. They symbolize penance, expectation. And then 1 of them will be pink, and that represents the coming of joy. I personally have never really even heard of this before until I was doing this research. I'm not Catholic, which might explain a large part of that. But so this was really interesting to find out. Because I'm doing this also to kind of be a holiday, episode, if you will. And so you're doing research on the idea of Christmas, not so much, but really it's hard for it not to kind of permeate this in some way. So I'm learning about the idea of Advent. I never really knew what it was, and I could honestly probably say I still don't fully know what it is, but the wreath does seem to play a large part of it. So the 4 Sundays preceding Christmas Day are embodied by the 4 candles that were lit each Friday of Advent at dinner, along with prayer. Similarly to Catholic customs, traditional pagan wreaths were also evergreen circles that consisted of 4 candles. A lot of similarities there. And these representations, what they symbolized were actually earth, wind, fire, and water. So it's interesting how they kind of run parallel with each other. In their wreaths, the pagans were typically used in rituals that would ensure the continuance of the circle of life. So there's just too many coincidences here, personally, for me. All right, so yeah, that we learned a lot about wreaths so far, and there's not too much more I want to get off my chest about wreaths before we move on and get on to the next thing. Actually, for the things I didn't know before, we're going to be talking about specifically Christmas lights and I think a few little tidbits about Santa Claus. So I'm gonna throw a few more things about wreaths at you, and then we'll just move on to the roundup and all that good stuff. So there are at least 2 other celebrations or different reasons that I saw that people actually use wreaths. There are actually a number of different ways that wreaths show up in society, but I want to mention a couple before we get out of here. So there's the Yule celebration, which is basically like in ancient Germany and some Scandinavian countries, evergreen wreaths were marked. They marked the winter solstice of Yule, right? And so Yule is a 12-day holiday when people celebrate the return of the sun and the cycle of the seasons. And so the greenery and natural materials of the wreath stood for nature and the promise of new light that came with the spring. So this is, like I was saying, another reason, like we talked about with the Romans and Greeks, like you will see wreaths throughout our entire almost history of not entire history, but of modern history in society. You'll see them pop up in a number of different places, but they don't all mean the same thing. It's not all just about Christmas. Sometimes it could be around Christmas, but it's not all centered on Christmas. Let's see. It does say here that Yule can be used interchangeably with Christmas, and I've heard it before, but I do believe what I was just referring to is something very specific, or at least more specific than just a synonym. Let's see. Then there have harvest wreaths, which are somewhat like the Yule celebrations. It's a symbol of preparing the harvest for the harsh winter. And so, we see the same reoccurring imagery with this stuff. It's like the evergreens always kind of stand for basically you being able to withstand the winter, which is, if you think about it, before we get like climate controlled environments, the winter was taking a lot of people out. Like, it just really was. If you lived in a place where it got really cold, and it still does now. Where I went to college at was a very small town, and we would all the time. Every year you would hear of people, and it would also get very cold. But every year you would hear of people who just died because they didn't have heat, and it got to be like, I don't know, -2 or something like that. You know what I mean? Maybe they were already old or whatever, or they had pre-existing conditions, but like they would just die because they didn't have, they couldn't control their climate. So when people look at this stuff and they see that, oh, this tree can make it through the winter, it's something they want to flock to, something they want to be associated with. That's why I think you see the same over and over again, almost in every situation or ritual that we see. The idea of like recurring life or the cycle of life, or being able to to withstand these difficult things is important. So I can get back on track here with these harvest wreaths. The idea of the circle. The round shape symbolizes that the cycle of the seasons wouldn't end, that you can keep on having these seasons, which you need for your crops. And I do believe that is about it for wreaths. And that is how wreaths happen. And now it's time for the roundup. The roundup. And we're going to round it up. The Persians and or the Greeks give us the first wreath. Wreaths become associated with Christianity around 500 AD. Wreaths become a part of Christmas in the Middle Ages, give or take. Things I didn't know before, and now I know them. Never heard of these things. What are they? All right, so for the things I didn't know before segment, it's going to be a little bit different, but not too much. It was more because normally this is reserved for things that I find during my research that I was just too juicy to not tell you guys as well. But this one, since I realized I'd already done the wreaths and I didn't really come across to anything wild, I thought, well, I'll just look up something else that I didn't know that's Christmas related and kind of throw it in here with that. So that's what we're going to get to today. Plus, a few other things. I learned something about Santa Claus, I think a couple days ago. I did not know that in some places throughout the world, they call him Father Christmas. I had never heard that before, and we actually had a conversation about that at my job, and I was just blown away. It's not mind blowing, but when you think of Santa Claus their whole life as being Santa Claus or Saint Nicholas or Kris Kringle, and then people out there they're saying Father Christmas. I don't know. It sounds more all encompassing than the idea of Santa Claus alone. It feels like, I don't know. I feel like when you say Father Christmas, I feel Santa's hand on my shoulder or something. Like, just telling me it's gonna be okay. I don't know. But so that's one thing I definitely didn't know. To kind of keep it in the running, in the vein of what normally happens here in this segment. We're going to talk about the idea of Christmas lights and how they kind of came to be and got on the fronts of people's houses and everything like that. So the first known electrically illuminated Christmas tree was done by a man named Edward H. Johnson in 1882. He was a friend of Thomas Edison. So they were all in that, trying to figure out this electricity thing. He actually did this while he was the vice president of the Edison Electric Light Company. Let's see, he had 3 different colors on this tree. It was red, white, and blue, which is America, you already. Like I said, this happened on December the 22nd, 1882, at his home on Fifth Avenue, and really nobody actually cared. The local papers did not cover it because they thought it was just a publicity stunt. Like, oh, look at this guy with the lights on the street, But it would eventually be covered and written down in the history books. He will be the guy who's known as having the first lit up Christmas tree. But the idea of the lights on the Christmas tree and also the lights on the house comes from putting candles on the tree. So that's what would happen for hundreds of years beforehand. Is there would be candles that would be put on the tree for a number of reasons, kind of like what we talked about with the wreaths and almost like the Advent, somewhat like that, where it's like it speaks to the light of life, if you will, but also it was there to illuminate the ornaments that were also there. And then they would sometimes, once the technology progressed, they would actually get these candles would be, I guess, kind of taped onto the tree, and it would have like they'd be in balls, so it almost kind of creates kind of the wave of ornaments and or lights that we have now. And like I said, it wasn't until around 1915, like I was saying earlier, that glass balls and lanterns were used on trees to kind of replace the candles. Basically, so this is what leads to the kind of trees that we have now. And the world of Christmas lights really became, more robust when we have the true invention of light bulbs and like the mass production of that. And there's an actually interesting. I find out I didn't know that basically GE when all this first happened in the early 20th century, GE they would rent out Christmas lights to people for the season, because when they were first made, they were too expensive. They were the first Christmas lights that were made were basically like $12 or something like that, and that was like $80 or something like that during that time for people. So it was new and people didn't want to put out the money for something like that. So what they did was they would actually rent them out to people. So if you ever see, an old picture of Christmas lights like 100 years ago, the people were renting those Christmas lights. That's something that I definitely didn't know inside this, didn't know, I didn't know before segments. It was like a hat on a hat, or like those little Russian dolls. Let's see, the first outdoor public electric light Christmas display, there's a lot to say, was organized by Frederick Nash, and he's part of the Pasadena Chamber of Commerce in Altadena, California. And this has been going continuously for the last 122 years, except for World War II. So it's been continuously lit, they say, since 1920. The first White House Christmas tree to have electric lights was in 1895, and that was during President Cleveland's administration. Let's see, and I think that's all we have for the Christmas lights portion. I mean, really, besides, because it's not that interesting to go any further into like the 20th century about it. Basically, like I said, they go from renting lights, things become more mass produced. Everybody can have them. I think this is the first real place you see lights on houses in the suburbs. Or also in the tract housing, which was a part of the early 1960s. But like that stuff, I don't know. It's not that juicy. But so that's it for things that I know before this week. All right, that's been another episode of How Did That Happen? We learned a lot about wreaths and even some Christmas lights. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. Like and subscribe wherever you can. It really helps the show. And I'll see you guys in a couple days for another episode of Bite Size Bios. As always, thanks for pressing play.